Hi guys, welcome to the webinar today. The topic is how to overcome technical limitations to scale up automation. We have our guest participant, Abhinav Sarna and Daniel Kennedy. Daniel is an intelligent automation service manager at St. John of God Healthcare. He's a qualified accountant, ACMA, and a finance professional. Daniel is with St. John of God Healthcare for a long time, and St. John of God started their journey in automation in April of 2017. So nearly coming to 3 years. One of the early mover in Western Australia, and the first few in Australia to start automation. I will ask him to take us through his journey and how he has come over the technical limitations. Our second participant is Abhinav Sarna. He is the Enterprise Performance Improvement Manager at Edith Cowan University. They started the journey in early 2018 or late 2017, and they are also scale up over last 2 years. Both of the organization we are helping, Mindfields is helping them to on their journey for automation. I am Mohit Sharma. I am part of Mindfields, and we are one of the advisory firm in Australia, one of the first advisory firm in Australia to do RPA from 2014 time. I think today's topic is quite interesting because we always have encountered the technical challenges when we start our RPA journey. Before we start RPA journey, the tools are always challenged, looking at their capabilities. But I think that time has passed, the tools have evolved. They are much more stable, much more having a better features than they had for 3 years back. And of course, the market has also matured. The end users have matured. We have more participants in the ecosystem to make the journey much more fruitful. So I will start today's webinar asking Daniel to share his experience. Again, something about Mindfields. So today's agenda is quite simple. I have introduced very briefly about the speakers. They will speak about themselves because I want them to also explain about their experience over last 3 years in the RPA journey in their organization. So they will be covering in this session about the challenges they have faced in their journey, how they have overcome those challenges, and what the lessons they have learned in that journey. So we will also have some polls to keep you awake. So there's more interaction happening between the participants and the audience about their challenges they are facing, so we can have some insight about the audience, how they're faring well in their journey. At least 15% of the participant or the audience have just sitting on the fence looking at how the RPA can help the organization. And 85% of the audience have started the journey already, and they are at different phases of their journey. Some have done phase 1, some have done POCs, some have started the journey and stopped for time being. Some are rethinking how to use other features of intelligent automation to ramp up their operations in automation. So I think we have audience of different demography and different flavors. So please feel free to ping your questions in the chat box, and you all are muted, so we can't speak, but please, in the chat window, you can ask your questions to us, and we'll find time to answer those questions. But I think the agenda is quite clear, which is on the screen now. And without taking much time from Daniel, I will invite him to come and speak about his journey at St. John of God over the last 3 years in the automation space. Daniel, over to you.
Thank you for that introduction, Mohit. I'll be happy to talk through these next few slides, and I'll just prompt as we go through. So thanks for everybody making time this afternoon to dial into this webinar. and to hopefully provide some feedback and some questions as well into the session. Just going through some of the journey for St John of God Healthcare, I'll just first of all say that we embraced RPA just a little bit under 3 years ago. And really, we were thinking about RPA from two different perspectives, one of which was around reducing our costs, our operational costs, and the other angle was actually making our services more scalable, because we do have busy and quiet times. And as you can imagine, at times like this with COVID, we're experiencing something of a surge in demand for some of our services as a healthcare provider in Australia. So the way I like to think about scaling from an RPA perspective is really around the three topics of asset growth, asset utilization, and asset maintenance and sustenance. And I think the premise of this conversation today really is about the idea of how you overcome the challenges of scaling vertically or horizontally. Because if you've embraced RPA, as we have and as other organisations, including ECU, have done, you can see that there is value to be derived from this technology, from this tool set. And so for me, the kind of lead into the conversation is horizontal or vertical increase. And by that, I mean lateral increases in the use of RPA within a business function. So I work in finance, and we've embraced RPA from an accounts receivable, accounts payable, and management accounting perspective. So horizontal might include moving into treasury or moving into deeper into management accounting or operational reporting, and other such matters, cash management and so on. But sorry, I probably got that the wrong way around, horizontal or vertical. The other side of the increase is when you're moving across operational boundaries or functional boundaries. So perhaps moving from finance into HR or from finance into operations, or any which way. So scaling horizontally or vertically has been covered there. And if we look at asset growth, which is what that horizontal and vertical scaling equates to, I like to try and put everybody listening into a familiar space. So a familiar space is project phasing, and hopefully initiation, planning, execution, monitoring, control, and closeout all mean something to you in terms of the project phases, depending on which discipline you use. And when we look at asset growth, I think that initially, obviously, you need some drivers to actually get on this journey of creating an asset. And those drivers are repeatable benefits, relative merits over human or other interoperability solutions, and relevance and applicability to your particular industry and your particular use cases. But there are obviously, with any change initiative, there's going to be challenges and barriers. So individuals who see RPA might have heard a lot of the hype about the fact that it takes jobs and that 40% of people's work will disappear in the next 10, 15, 20 years. And some of those fears might be legitimate depending on what type of job you have. But in other instances, they may not be as founded as they might otherwise be. Every organisation will have technology preferences and will have its own technology strategy, whether that's around introducing a customer relationship management tool set or an ERP or a customer information set, and may have technology preferences as well around where it lie. So it might have a lot of .NET development and do a lot of its own application development in-house, or it might prefer to buy things commercial off the shelf. Infrastructure scaling, from our perspective, we've got 12 bots, which means that we had to spin up 12 virtual PCs in our data center, and as well as scaling those bots up in terms of providing them with all the resources they needed, CPU, RAM, hard drives, and then the configuration files and the ability to log into different applications and so on and so forth. All takes time. And of course, the other side to that is that you need to have licensing in place to enable you to do that kind of in-house scaling. Because we're a medical healthcare service, data security is particularly important for us because of the sensitive nature of the information that we house. And there's many regulatory requirements on us in terms of having the appropriate data security in place for anybody or anything that has access to the underlying data of our business. And of course, RPA design and development cost is going to be a challenge and a barrier, potentially, although it could be that this is the cheapest way that you can get some of the benefits that you would look for otherwise from an alternative technology. But you really do have to examine it on its own merits, and not every business process necessarily fits for RPA. So in the project frame, those are the things that you're thinking about, but you've also got to keep in mind what's going to be the maintenance and support overhead, because with any asset, you will need to maintain it, whether that's a building, whether that's a power line, whether it's a technology. There's going to be a maintenance and support overhead after the project's finished. If you could just go on to the next slide. So I'm following the natural kind of chronology of things in the way that I'm describing this. So having now embarked on a project, you're in execution. And execution is a pretty broad kind of term, but the kind of barriers you get in this space are absolutely familiar, and they have nothing to do with RPA. Schedule slippage because planned resources are unavailable. Schedule slippage because the resource estimates were wrong. Technical difficulties that weren't apparent because in your high level or even your deep dive scoping and discovery work, there were things that you didn't account for. And of course, as you're working with your stakeholders, whether it's waterfall, agile, or any other methodology, you probably get some scope changes from the original brief. And then a long list, which I wanted to kind of carry separately on the next slide, which describes probably some of the things that I personally have seen more in an RPA world than I've seen with other technology projects that I've been a part of. So the temptation, I think, when you have an RPA development kind of program in front of you is to use the script of the RPA tool to solve every problem, but that may not be the best way to solve the problem. The best way may be to look upstream of the business process and to think about whether or not it can be better solved by making changes to a report or an email process, or maybe a different way of gathering data than using the user interface. So the first 2 points really are around making sure that you don't take the RPA hammer and start thinking that everything that you're looking at is a nail. It really does need to be considered on its own individual merits at each time. Perhaps something that's not specific to RPA, test environments becoming unavailable during the execution timeline, or being dissimilar to prod. Those are particularly pointed when you're using a technology like RPA, because it does only exactly what you tell it to do. If you were doing something that was more around a human change management, some of the changes may be smooth. The test environment differences versus production might be smoothed over by users placing an amount of intelligence and interpretation. But with RPA, you're definitely going to reveal changes or dissimilarities between your different environments. And as you implement RPA, it's not an island solution. You can't just implement RPA and have no involvement with other components of the IT world. You might need to talk with your enterprise team. You might need to talk with networks around traffic management. And of course, you're going to need to talk to security, particularly when it comes to accessing internal websites and making sure that you're covering all your data governance protocols adequately. Every RPA developer is not the same, in the same way as every renderer that comes to your house or plumber that comes to your house is not the same. They all have different merits, and so some RPA developers will have a particular skill set which might be well suited to this, but not to something else. And they obviously come with different levels of experience and ability to solve problems innate to them as human beings. The next thing to talk about perhaps is modularity and reusability of tasks and components, which we've certainly been able to do as we've got 12 scripts, and they to some extent borrow functionality between the different tasks, and that's given us a little bit of leverage so that we're not always recreating a brand new script. We're often able to take a part of an existing script and modify it slightly to leverage that. And as we ourselves have got 12 scripts in production and 12 bots, and as we're managing the development pipeline, we're conscious of the need to manage those changes one by one. It's very difficult to do in parallel change management, because there's a risk that you end up with multiple versions of the same script, and then trying to mash them all back together again at some point in the future is probably a risk you don't want to take. So there is a need to go through a sequential process as you're updating the individual scripts, is certainly what we've found. A bit like the dissimilarity between development and a production environment, I guess the next bullet I've talked about is that RPA seems to us to be very susceptible and vulnerable to environmental aberrations, such as a Microsoft Outlook problem that's instantaneous for a bot becomes an insurmountable problem, as can also happen with a website that undergoes maintenance that you're not aware of. And just the last bullet point I'd like to make on our particular journey is that the expectation, I think, going into RPA was that automation would be 100% successful. There would be no failures. And because of some of the factors above, that's not really what we've observed, though we have managed to achieve very high success rates. Even 99% has been considered at times during our journey to be insufficient. And what that has led to is a lot of rework and a lot of project extensions effectively to get to a point where we are much closer to 100% successful. If you could just move on to the slide.
So Daniel, I would like to ask one question here to you, is that you were one of the first company, one of the first, maybe first few in WA to start the journey in RPA. At that time, the tools were quite different, quite naive, quite basic, and now they're quite robust. So what technical challenges you are facing to upskill your team as the tools are evolving?
I think that the technical challenges are perhaps linked into the upgrade path that you take with the tool set. So we've bought into a particular tool set, which is Automation Anywhere. And so we're on a path effectively where we need to follow their drumbeat in terms of upgrade path from 10 through 11 through to A 2019, for those who are familiar with the different versions. And so there's a constant kind of need to monitor what those additional functionalities offer you, because you might be trying to fix something in your existing version which actually is promised to be fixed in the next version. We've had some issues like that, but for the most part, we've tried to fix the existing problem that we've encountered, or shortfall against 100% that we've encountered, by working with the existing version of the tool set. And the support from the sort of wider RPA community, including Mindfields and including Automation Anywhere, has been pretty good in that respect. But it's by no means been easy. It's been challenging because we're also trying to learn the tool and don't have a lot of internal expertise on it. So we're kind of reliant on the RPA ecosystem around us.
So I think, Daniel, I will be very interested in this slide which you're presenting on the monitoring and control. You coming from an accounting background, qualified accountant, CMA, how you're bringing those experience into an RPA journey?
Yeah, so I think the key thing really from our perspective that we've learned during the process of this journey, Mohit, is that the robots can tell you whatever they like, but because the robots are doing things in place of what humans used to do in line of business applications, the source of truth that one always needs to be mindful of is the line of business application. So the need to monitor and control for me has been all about having reporting coming out of the bots, which enables me to see what the bots tell me they think they've done, but then to actually do a reconciliation process with the business application and to understand whether or not that is in fact what the bots have done. Provides obviously another kind of point of your acceptance test criteria from a user perspective, a business process owner perspective. And the other thing it does, as you kind of work through some of the finer points of the problems that do arise, certainly early on in the journey, taking that approach, is that you understand a lot better where the problem is in the script, and you understand why the problem's occurring. Because knowing the problem is one thing, but you really need to figure out how do you solve the problem. So I think that, you know, I'd advocate for and recommend to anybody who's on this journey, make sure that you have considered in your project planning how you're going to get reporting in your line business application that enables you to validate what the bots are doing and prove to the business process owners, your sponsors, and anybody who has a view on these things, the truth, to give them the absolute, you know, database control. And it's the same kind of approach, I guess, that I've seen audit firms use when they conduct their annual audit processes, whether that's from a financial accounting audit perspective or whether it's from a risk and control perspective of IT systems.
No, thank you very much, Daniel.
That's okay. So I think in the monitoring control, we probably just talked about some of those things, Mohit, exactly that that we certainly experienced, and I think that the unrealistic expectations and negative feedback is something which, for me, makes asset growth so important to get right, because when you're first implementing RPA, there is inevitably the temptation to say that it's not successful. And as you go through that journey, you can really you can create an impression and a long-lasting impression in the days that we live in today, where people can say, things on social media and they can say things freely without challenge. You need to be able to provide a factual account and kind of go into a myth-busting mode, which I know Abhinav will talk about a little bit when we turn this over for the ECU journey. But I really think those are the sort of key lessons that we've certainly learned. We're kind of on our third or fourth round now of making improvements and making augmentations to our original sort of scope that we embarked upon nearly 3 years ago. And we've certainly taken a lot of what we've learned from those first couple of goes at the rodeo into what we're doing now. Next slide. I think we might have covered monitoring control reasonably. So coming back to the original slide I presented, I think what I would, as I was kind of framing this whole kind of spiel, I was thinking to myself, realistically, for you to be able to get to asset growth once you've actually embarked on RPA, you really need to make sure that you can demonstrate to the business that you are utilizing your asset well. And that means being able to scale up and down and demonstrating, one of the use case benefits that we certainly embarked upon back in 2017, which is the ability to cope with downsize and upsize, which certainly we see a wide variation, where I might process 5,000 records one day and I might process 8,000 records the next, and the day after that I might process 2,000. And the great thing is, of course, that RPA can handle whichever of those scenarios that you present to it. From an asset maintenance and sustenance perspective, we're constantly updating various different things in the standard operating environment for our business. We're updating individual applications that the bots interact with. And so keeping an eye on how the world is dynamically changing for the bots is incredibly important, because they do not have the ability to adapt other than through what we instruct them to adapt. So humans are vastly more adaptable than RPA is, and that's not to say that I'm throwing stones at RPA. I'm just saying that you've got to recognize what you're buying into when you buy an RPA asset. You have to maintain the usefulness of the asset going forward. And only if you've kind of got those things in place, I think, you can then look at scaling upwards. Because as long as you have any doubts in the sort of utilization or maintenance and sustainability perspective in your business, then that acts as a natural kind of cautioner for people who are considering scaling RPA into their function or across the function, whichever way we're going. Next slide.
So Daniel, can I also do one poll here, just to keep the audience awake? What is the biggest technical challenge they have faced in their RPA journey? Infra setup, version upgrade, scalability, increase the number of bots and processes, RPA alternatives like .NET development, etc., or API integration. So please let us know what the challenges you have faced in your journey, and there are multiple choice options. So if you have more than one, it is okay. So Daniel, like in the current environment of COVID-19, you're working from home. Most of the organizations in Australia or offshores are working from home. How you are finding it a bit of a relief that some of the processes you can operate from your home also? If I recall right, you get up in the morning and operate those processes from your home. Am I right?
You are right. And it's kind of, for me, RPA is now something that we could be at an inflection point, I think, in the sort of in the world at large as we come through COVID-19, because people are working from home. And I think that that working from home sort of premise may very well be quite disruptive for businesses, and businesses will perhaps come back to some semblance of normality in due course, and they'll be wondering how well were they set up for COVID-19 from a business continuity perspective, from an emergency response management perspective, from a disaster recovery perspective. Did they have the right tools in place for working from home, or did they have to scurry around to kind of put them in place? Were they able to offload a load of their human work to automation so that it could be handled? Because obviously the automation is impervious to COVID-19. It's going to be completely unaffected. So I kind of think that there's, it's obviously a worldwide disaster, but at the same time, I think that what could happen as a result of this is that people could actually see that the use of technology is something which would insulate us against the problems of COVID-19 in some respects, at least.
Sure, I think I'll agree with you on that, Daniel. We are seeing the same thing. A lot of our IT assets, which we have not used, like even Microsoft Teams, we are using it in a more aggressive mode now. So the answer to the poll is in front of all of us. Abhinav, your views on this outcome of this poll?
Kind of aligns with our mindset over the years as well. When I see scalability at 75%, the question always comes around to, you've made an initial investment of how many ever hundreds of thousands in this platform. How do you continue to prove that you're maximizing the value of it? And how do you continue to engage with business units and other parts of the business who either might be skeptical of the benefits of RPA or are just cautious of investing time and effort in RPA when they could just continue with BAU and are sometimes even happy to wait for traditional IT solutions to come through? Just completely agree with it. Our perspective, or ECU's perspective, has been that another major challenge that we faced has been around version upgrades, purely because what we've noticed is that the vendors are sometimes obviously looking to push in terms of getting these upgrades through and are almost testing their way through of finding out how these upgrades need to take place. And the large amount of time that we spend on calls or conference calls with these vendors is more of them experimenting to find out issues with why these upgrades aren't as smooth as they potentially can be, as opposed to them having a clear-cut answer or path to getting that upgrade done in the least amount of time.
I agree with you on this, Abhinav. And Daniel, your views on this outcome of this poll?
Yeah, I'm not surprised that the third option gets the most interest. I'm actually surprised that nobody had problems with infrastructure setup. I'm not saying that it was a huge problem for us, but it certainly wasn't a case of just bring in a laptop, put it on somebody's desk and start running RPA off it, because that would have been a very sustainable approach anyway. But yes, so
and also,
for sure.
So both Abhinav and Daniel, both you are from business background and you are driving RPA or automation initiative in your organizations. What if it was a CIO or IT department running this initiative? Do you think for them it would have been much more smoother or easier, or is an inherent limitation in the whole automation, or we are evolving in automation industry as such?
I'll probably point to the P in RPA. Robotic process automation, in my opinion, should always be business-led and technology-enabled, purely because we are ultimately dealing with business processes, and the rationalization or the re-engineering or the effort to automate them should be something that's led actively by the business. What we found in our experience, at least, in my prior experience with previous firms as well, is that the moment the business starts to take leadership of RPA as a solution, your ability both in terms of being able to re-engineer processes as well as being able to measure and track benefits becomes exponentially better. IT plays an important role, there's no doubt about it, whether it's enabling infrastructure or giving you a platform that's sustainable and efficient to work with. But the level of business engagement is of paramount importance to make sure that it's sustainable and it delivers the benefits that it was stated to.
And Daniel, for you, like, do you think if led by IT, it would be much more better, or same outcome would have achieved?
I'd like to think that within our organisation, it was very much step in step. So I don't feel that IT was holding me back. I totally respected, and my team actually did a lot of the delivery here rather than me, totally worked collaboratively with the IT department. I do think what Abhinav is right, which is that the business does need to lead the use of RPA. I think that the difficulty comes for the business that there is actually many ways to grandma's house in any particular business process example. And certainly the C-suite will be inundated with messages from various different consultants, software vendors, all saying, pick me, pick me, pick me. So I think that the advantage of ensuring that IT are involved in the journey is that they are more likely to be able to provide an IT-centric view of what is the appropriate technology to use, and then to provide advice around that matter. I think then that the business itself needs to very strongly advocate for what it is it's trying to achieve, whether that's cost savings, whether that's business resilience, whether that's scalability to volume, or whether that's just giving people time back in their day, reducing mundane tasks. Any and all of those things are all probably good reasons why you should go down or you should contemplate an RPA path. But again, I come back to this notion that RPA is not the only panacea to every problem, but it certainly has some unique attributes which make it a best choice in certain situations. And that's what we've seen.
Thanks, Daniel. So Daniel, the slide for you is in front of you. Your lessons learned.
Yeah, thank you. So I think, it's kind of the first point I've already talked a little bit about, which is just making sure that people all see RPA as an asset. And some people will see it as a threat, particularly when the lived experiences is that there are less people in roles than there have been in the past. But we do have better processes and we have a better level of service as a result of using RPA than we did in the past. I think from an IT perspective, it's incredibly important that you have scripting standards and you employ somebody who is able to make sure that you're using best practice IT, because non-best practice IT means maintenance and support nightmares, and it means RPA degradation from a brand perspective. Technical support documentation really is, from my perspective at least, it's about survivability of the asset and making sure that as you inevitably see people come and go, that you're not reliant upon that person's individual understanding, and you've actually adequately documented from a technical standpoint how the asset works and why it was designed that way, so that there's not a lot of second guessing after there's changes in personnel. And making sure that asset management and sustenance resources are available is critical. I kind of think about this in very simple terms, which is if I bring in RPA and it gives me, let's say, 10 FTE equivalent saving. I'm not saying that FTEs leave the business. I'm just saying that that's the value of it to the business, and that was the business case. If I have to put back in 2 people to provide support and maintenance for the asset I've created, I think I'm still ahead. And I'm probably going to have an ROI and an NPV, which most finance managers would approve of. So if we can go to the slide. Thank you. So really this comes back to what Abhinav and I just answered to your question. Is RPA looking for a business problem to solve? You've got to be careful that that's not the route that you're going down, I think. That's certainly what we've experienced. but what I try to do is I try to remind everybody that RPA is now a tool that we have in our toolbox, whereas before we had pliers, a hammer, a couple of spanners, you know, a wrench, a saw maybe. We've now got this extra tool called RPA, and we should consider whether or not this is a tool that we should use as part of feasibility or initiation of any project. And then just make sure you decide that RPA is the right and best tool for the business problem that you're trying to solve. And I think we talked a little bit as well, Abhinav, sorry, your question to me, Mohit, around that I answered by saying that, you know, you need to have understanding of your business, line of business application data. Make sure that you know what your success and error rates are once you're actually executing. And if you can, make sure you know what they were beforehand, because it's actually been quite interesting to me to see people getting very agitated by a 99% success rate. I would love to know whether or not we had a 99% success rate when humans were doing the activities that the bots are now doing. My suspicion is that it was probably closer to 98% because human error tends to sit between 0.5% and 2%. But unfortunately, I don't know. And looking back now, the benefit of hindsight, I think what I would do as part of my discovery is I'd actually find out what the success and error rates are, so that I am able to demonstrate whether or not automation has improved or just kept pace with what was existing. I think it's important to decide what your project methodology is going to be. We vacillated a little bit. We had a business case which was waterfall, and then once the business case was approved, we went agile. And that was probably the right decision from a product development perspective, because we used the product backlog notion with the various different business processes that we were automating. But it did mean that there was a lot of room for scope kind of movement as we went through the project. And that probably meant that we were a little bit off track in terms of having the same expectation at the end of the project. And that comes into the next bullet, which I say is committing to an aligned view of what success looks like. Utilising and leveraging existing assets for me is about don't write a script if you can use an existing upstream process. Like it might be a BI report that you get, it might be an email, it might be an existing report that you can pull out of your ERP, which you then use to start the process of your automation. And don't go back in via the UI if you can avoid it. If you've got an API for your ERP or your CRM or whatever it happens to be, then use the API rather than using the user interface. Don't just think RPA needs to replace what the user used to do, which is, of course, its main selling point. Integrating and aligning it with your IT team's view of the processes and systems roadmap for the future. Making sure that you've built for dynamic volumes and variables is about that, you know, scalability of volume. And think about what your business continuity and your error handling is going to be, because there are multiple different things that can go wrong, and you don't always think about them when you're talking with your business owners at discovery, and you don't even think about them all when you're doing your user acceptance testing. Sometimes it's stuff that catches you after the fact when you've gone live and you're now into maintenance and support. And that leads into last, providing for asset maintenance and sustenance. I think I've only got one more slide. So the other things just to remark upon from our perspective as lessons learned were that we saw some changes in the way that Automation Anywhere particularly provides support, and it was really around, you know, embracing a community-led kind of knowledge base approach, which is great because it leverages everybody's experience in the community. So it really has some positive sides to it. But I think that having a technical moderator from a vendor platform perspective is useful, because they can often you know, cut to the chase if there's a lot of discussion around the best way to do something. Sometimes a moderator can come in and kind of provide that, you know, this is the best way for you to do it based upon the specification that we've designed. And I think that the other thing that we think, particularly with our choice of tool set, is just there are some functionality limitations, and of course these things have grown over time. So Automation Anywhere is a very mature tool set nowadays, as are all of them really. They're all maturing and they're all developing all the time. Case statements is something that we just think would be useful to have, and that may be coming in later versions that we haven't yet evaluated of the RPA toolset that we use.
Sure. Thanks, Daniel. I think it's quite informative, and you share your experience quite insightfully with all the facts and figures you've experienced during your journey. I been also involved with you in your journey, and I think it is one of the very good a case study to demonstrate how you can achieve the business case from consistent and persistent application of RPA in the business process. Your last slide about automation anywhere, and before Abhinav starts his experience and journey, I want to have one more poll, which might be a conduit to both the presentations. And you both have one common factor of automation anywhere as a tool. So would you re-elect? I'll just launch the poll. And audience, please, poll, give your votes before I share the results with the whole audience. So both Daniel and Abhinav, you have same tool. And will you change your tool if you have to restart your journey? You both are doing the journey for last 3 years, and from last 3 years, it is just like going from a landline to mobile phone. So I would appreciate your views. Will you change your AI tool?
No, and I think the inherent reason there, Mohit, is because the tool sets in themselves have been more than willing to move from being a landline to a mobile. So Automation Anywhere has been a great vendor to work with in terms of the fact that they're constantly looking at evolving, constantly looking at tapping into client engagement and feedback to improve the offering. But more than anything else, my firm belief is that we need to continue to be tool agnostic when we look at RPA. Business decision was taken at the initial point in time in selecting a particular tool set for whatever reasons that may be, but sticking with it and continuing to be tool agnostic and continuing to reap the benefits of it are more important. And each of these vendors equally will be putting in the same amount of time and effort and investment in relation to improving their products and offerings.
Okay, thank you. And Daniel, your views?
Very similar to Abhinav, I think realistically, and the only other thing I'd say is that, for those people who haven't selected a tool yet because they're still thinking about their RPA journey, I just think just select for your own reasons, obviously, but one thing that I particularly think has been good for us is Automation Anywhere. I've got a customer success manager, and having that relationship, which is not about sales, but it's about actually looking after you as a customer and providing a voice into Automation Anywhere is a great it's a great compliment to them as an organization that they're actually thinking customer first, and it just means that your voice is actually realistically heard. We've certainly experienced response when we had some issues early on in our journey, which were above and beyond in terms of what we realistically could have expected. So I think it would be, it isn't something that I would personally choose. I think it's good to retain some agnostic kind of views on your tool set, a bit like the ERP versus SAP versus all the other tools, Dynamics and whatever else out there in the marketplace. And it's very difficult to answer from my perspective because I don't know whether Blue Prism or UiPath or any of the other 14 tools out there are any better overall. So I think the answer is no from me.
Yeah, I think it reflects in also the outcome which is on the screen now. So I think I also agree that there should be a valid reason to move from tool A to tool B, because the company or organization has already invested a lot time in understanding the tool and investing in the tool. So I think it should be a very major reason to make a shift or change. Thanks, Daniel, for sharing your insights. And I would like to invite now Abhinav Sarna from ECU to speak about himself first and then about his journey in the RPA space at ECU.
Thanks, Mohit. Thanks for the opportunity to present at this webinar. I guess just to give people perspective, I joined ECU in early 2019, probably a year after ECU had started their journey of automation. So So I've had the unique perspective of seeing where ECU has grown their portfolio of automation, as well as seeing how I entered from day one and there was already a platform to begin with. ECU's RPA journey has been quite interesting in the fact that it started off initially with a view of how can we improve performance, considering that there's increasing competition within the higher education sector. And it was also coupled with the fact that there's a strong lens of data and analytics within the organization. And hence the decision really was, can automation help in incorporating information better towards making better decisions within the workforce? So ECU's come a long way. Today we're closing in on 50 digital workers in our production environment, and we're covering core processes that cover almost all of our major business units and schools involved. We've made a key decision in terms of following a very centralized governance model. We have an in-house development team that I manage, and we have BAU support that's provided by Mindfields, and that's given us a large amount of benefit over time. So if we move on to the next slide, I guess when the question came through from Mohit and Mindfields on this particular webinar, there were a couple of different perspectives that I was thinking of in terms of taking when it came to presenting our challenges. One was we could go down the lines of the typical discussion around people, technology, or governance. But perhaps from my perspective, what I've seen is that this isn't necessarily a challenge when it comes to people, technology, and governance, but more so about myth busting, breaking misinformation and myths that are prevalent within an organization when it comes to RPA. And the simplistic reason for it is that automation has always been viewed with a very different lens from your stakeholders within an organization. There is a perceived sense of injustice at times when it comes to automation. There have been the numerous studies that have been published that shows that automation is a job killer or an opportunity killer, etc. And hence, you almost enter into an environment where there is that perceived sense of or lack of trust with RPA. And that's what I wanted to try and address as part of this, was what are the 3 or 4 common myths that we've seen as part of our journey, and what have we done as a team of dedicated mythbusters to try and challenge that with sound and detailed evidence. The first one that we've seen more often than not is the counter that scaling RPA typically means hundreds of bots that are scurrying through your technical environment that are left unfettered and left to their own devices. And that's what I found really interesting in Daniel's presentation as well, is the discussion around, well, let's define scale and let's look at scaling from those 3 different matrices that he presented. And our perspective as well is that we need to have a foundational baseline as to what scaling actually means. In our landscape, we've looked at it as we develop an initial set of 12 as a proof of value, and thereafter we've looked at incrementally adding 10 to 12 bots year on year. And what that's helped us to do is we've always made sure that we've kept our stakeholders aligned in terms of those expectations around scaling. The second myth in that statement around the fact that it can be left unfettered and left to their own device is what we've challenged constantly by creating and embedding a robust periodic audit of our digital workforce. In fact, one thing that we've started to do more and more is we've moved away from calling them an audit and more a performance review. The counter being that if this is your digital workforce, can we treat this just as you would your employees by having a performance review conducted periodically? And we've looked at it from 3 different variables. One in terms of accuracy, the second in terms of the efficiency, and the third in terms of the solution's robustness to withstand changes to people, process, or technology. And what's happened as a result is we've made process owners more accountable for their digital workforce, as well as addressing misconceptions of RPA being another IT tool set per se. The second myth is that a digital workforce is the complete solution to underlying issues with efficiency. And I think Daniel alluded to this as well in his presentation. And what we found is that if we go back to some of our key lessons learned of our RPA journey and we look at instances of some of our bots, we found that we've sometimes fitted RPA to business problems. And what that's resulted is in scenarios where RPA either hasn't been fully adopted or leveraged, or there have been a number of constant issues that we've had to manage in terms of the expectations with bots. Since then, we've taken a very steadfast approach in terms of divesting away from being perceived as being an RPA provider towards being more of a holistic team of business transformation specialists. And we've done that by looking at 4 key things. One is, can we provide services in process re-engineering? 2 is, can we start looking at digitizing processes rather than leaving them as paper-based? 3 is, can we lean on industry-leading methodologies like Lean Six Sigma to rationalize process? And 4, as I alluded to earlier, is leveraging on our rich insights and data from an analytics team to improve data quality and data management. So RPA might still be our core competency and offering, but it's now been augmented by a number of different approaches as well.
And Abhinav, you are also part of BI, so that aligns with your
100%.
overall job responsibility?
100%. So we're part of a broader team, which is the Enterprise Performance and Analytics team. So there's a component of our team that's focused on business analytics and business insights. And we lean on each other from time to time. As an example, there have been scenarios where we've leaned on the BI team to give us insights on issues within processes, and then we worked on automating them. And similarly, we've automated processes to provide more sound data for the BI team to visualize in Tableau. So it goes hand in hand.
So I think, Abhinav, I will just do one more poll, and I will come to some questions which people have asked us. So I will just launch this poll, and then I'll come to you with some more questions. So please select your organization's preference for their automation journey. Select one or more of the following. Abhinav, so looking at your journey at ECU, you have gone to back office process in the beginning, and now you are coming into the front office process. What you're looking in your process for selection for automation?
I think there's a standard template or questionnaire that we always try to adopt. But if I think back to some of the common themes, it's, do you have a process that's fairly stable, unlikely to change? Do you have a process where you've already investigated with typical integration mechanisms and they've been found to be too costly? Do you have a pressing time challenge to resolve an issue or problem statement that requires addressing fairly soon? Or in some instances that we're facing at the moment, are we looking at scenarios where we want to stop relying on regular data practices or poor data practices and improve them with RPA? Data quality has been a major foundational issue for ECU in many spaces, and hence RPA has been found to be a really robust mechanism to improve that in many respects.
So now we have got the polls result also. So any views from you, Daniel, on this?
I think that's probably quite similar to what I would expect. Certainly from my perspective, the natural inclination is to push for tools like Oracle and so on to provide some of the functionality that we're looking for with RPA and IA. So yeah, it looks very similar to what I'd expect.
Abhinav, your views?
Pretty much similar. We've always constantly put forward the position that where possible, source systems, source applications should always be left to solve the challenge first, purely in terms of sustainability over the longer term. But where we've found instances where it's either too costly, too ineffective, or too long to do is where RPA comes in as an effective alternative.
So all these technical challenges must be impacting your business case, because those were not factored in when you did the business case. So how you are coming up with overcoming those challenges of not meeting business case or meeting business case with less ROI due to this new technical challenges in the RPA journey?
I think it's a matter of setting clear expectations with stakeholders. I think one of the most common conversations that we're having from time to time is the fact that RPA is a journey. It's not a 1 year or a 1.5 year journey. It is an ongoing journey to consistently validate your business case. And there will be challenges that crop up over time. But what you have to be cognizant of is the fact that as long as you're able to provide reliable and efficient services with each bot that you're introducing into a production environment, and you have consistent monitoring and control mechanisms to make sure that they adhere to standards and your overall business case, you're more likely to achieve your longer term investment profiling that you were after than not.
Nothing like this. We have same experience with other clients also. And Daniel, from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's hard when you talk about an NPV or a ROI in a business case, not necessarily to do the counting of what it's going to cost from a technical perspective, but the overall RPA use case may very well span not only monetary benefits you can cash out, if you like, but also have quantifiable qualitative benefits. And every organization I've worked for over the last 25, 30 years has a different merit point system to things like safety, to quality, to customer, to finance. So it's entirely possible to get a business case up which has heavy technical resource requirement, but overall the value that's delivered through the use of RPA is worth investing in.
So as we are got 3 minutes left, I will do the last poll, and then if you can summarize your journey and challenges you have overcome in one minute, less time, but again, so Abhinav, you start first. If you can summarize your journey.
Our journey has been one of starting to learn that RPA isn't necessarily the only solution to the world's problems, and it needs to be coupled with a number of different key initiatives. It's also a journey where we've learned that collaboration with IT and with stakeholder groups that are not only back-end functions but front-end functions is key towards having a sustainable delivery of RPA over time. And lastly, what we've learned more than not is that if we didn't have a robust governance mechanism in place, we probably would have struggled to achieve what we've been able to achieve in the last 1.5 years or 2.
And Daniel, your side, if you can summarize.
My side is probably more along the lines of the big learning from our RPA journey is that a lot of our processes aren't standardized enough, and the data flow through the process is not structured enough. So RPA is part, for me, of a digital transformation for the whole organization, which then gives it an unfortunate kind of around its neck to get people to support it, because you're asking for more than just RPA. But the benefits you can achieve with RPA are truly astounding in certain cases where you have already got relatively standardized processes and you've got relatively structured data.
Sure. Thanks, Daniel. And we have also the outcome of the poll, the last poll which we have got, the top challenge. The top challenge you have faced in the following, all has got same 25%. But I think any words from you, Abhinav and Daniel, on this?
I'd say process selection and competing priorities. We put a lot of effort into making sure that we have effective mechanisms to compare one RPA solution over the other. And that's where a large amount of focus has been put. Process selection as well has been just as important for us, or a bigger challenge.
So okay. Just reflecting on the fact that it isn't even split across those different areas for the different respondents who are participating in the poll. And that really does say that it totally depends upon your situation, your context, and what business process that you're considering RPA for.
Yeah, I think you're right, because it's like by experience, you will gain more knowledge on what process to select over the period of time. I think you both have got at least now three year plus experience. So that particular first option would be lower from your perspective. And if somebody's starting the journey now, I think number 3 will be the main problem for them. So I think we have come to our end of our time, and we still have got 6 more questions to be answered, but we park it for time being. I would like to thank you, Daniel and Abhinav, both for being present and sharing their insights into their challenges they have faced and how they have overcome. Thanks again for your time, both of you. I really appreciate that, and thank you from all the audience who have present in this time to attend this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mohit.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks,
Thanks,
Abhinav.
Thanks, everybody.